Welcome to another episode of Challenging the Norm. Here's an hers look at life and business with your hosts, Paul Snell and myself, Lindsay Burden. The podcast for solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, and business owners that want to experience success in their own way. Wrestling with the topics that matter and reality checking the latest trends in business. Paul works with business owners, showing them how they can take the stress out of transforming teams into performance powerhouses that love what they do, while I offer business coaching that empowers ambitious women in business to create financial abundance and a time-rich lifestyle without sacrificing their joy. Well, it's lovely to see you again, Paul, and I'm super excited to be recording another episode of Challenging the Norm. And we have an interesting topic that we've already been wrestling with, as we normally do. But before we get started, how are you today?
Oh, I'm on good form, as they say, fine fettle. And I don't know why, really, because it's raining really hard out the window in the office here. It's not sunny, it's not warm, but do you know what? It's good.
It is a good day. It's always a good day when you and I get together. Now, today, our topic sort of has come about because of a decision that my daughter had made, and me having to have that conversation with her around taking 100% responsibility for not only her decision, but the outcomes from that decision, which has led you and I to talk about consequences of a decision, decisions that we are making, decisions that we are not making, or decisions we're making and we're not acting upon. So you had a really interesting take for me on consequences. And it feels, when I say the word, it feels like it's a really bad negative word.
It's not. It's not. And I think you're right. We should point this out. Consequences are an inevitable outcome of a decision or an action. So it's not a bad word. It's just a real, actual thing.
It is. And when we're talking about consequences, in business, we are making decisions all the time, even when we're not making them. We've covered that before. When you're not making a decision, you're still making a decision. And for us, and just to borrow your word, nuances, because you like that one at the moment, there are lots of nuances to this. And that's because, you and I have talked about making a decision, acting upon it, going with it, starting, seeing where the journey is going or where it will take you. Then there is the other side of that where we get so stuck in trying to work out all the scenarios, we don't do anything. There's a decision, not doing anything. So when we look at business as a whole, the consequences are there all the time in making a decision, not making a decision, acting upon it, not acting upon it. And what was interesting when we were doing the preamble is you were talking about this. We're not talking enough about the consequences, understanding the outcomes that may or may not result from a decision that you have made and acted upon or not acted upon, as the case may be.
Yeah, and you've said something that's made me think now. Are outcomes and consequences the same thing?
I was just using a different word because I recognize you're saying consequences a lot.
Yeah.
I think they are the same thing.
I agree they're the same thing. I just wonder if they're viewed the same way. You see, for me, consequences are inevitable. Outcomes are too. It just depends which outcome, right? But consequences are inevitable. And I don't know about you, Lindsay, but if I read a lot and I look at them just like you do, and the stuff that I see from various sources around making a decision or taking an action, particularly in business, such as starting a new business, all the focus is put on the front-loaded bit. Do you want to be a millionaire in 2 weeks? You just need to follow my one thing and you'll be there. So it's all front-loaded. It's like, that's what you got to make the decision on. And there's never a discussion or a thought about what the consequences might be, good, bad, or indifferent. And so for me, consequences become really important because if you make a decision and you can bear the consequences of that decision, whatever that might be, it's much more okay and palatable to do that than it is to make a decision and go, well, I'm not sure what the consequences would be, but I'm going to do this anyway. So I don't know. I feel consequences, and you have to be a bit careful, right? Because what you don't want to say to people is, well, that means you don't ever make a quick decision. We have to sometimes,
Yeah, we do.
and that's the nature of business, right? But also we have to be. I think we have to be more mindful of owning consequences. Is really where I was coming from.
And now I've used those two words. And at the beginning, I said consequences feels really negative,
Yeah.
where outcomes, I can't help but smile when I say outcomes, because I feel like I'm more in control of outcomes. I've decided what the outcomes are that I want to achieve. So therefore, I am leading, I am in control, I am moving forward. Where consequences feels like there's a good, bad, and the ugly, and who knows what we're going to get. So I think that's no, I think that's absolutely really interesting for me. Now we're starting to explore that. So for me, I think there's a difference. And it feels like the outcome is when I am in control, where the consequences are what may or may not happen. And I wonder if that comes about from we are not in control of everything. We can only control the controllable. And using your example of starting a business, I start a business, I just need to register at a company's house or wherever you are in the world, and I can get started. Um, and then the next step, and we were talking about this, and you used a brilliant example, you then, there is something that happens, and suddenly you're in a whole different ball game, and everything is probably taking its own life, and it's just heading in one direction, and now you don't know what you're doing. So consequences, I don't want people. This is my challenge, and this is where I'm struggling. I don't want people to go, oh, well, I can't make a decision because there'll be all these things that may or may not happen, because that's what stalls our businesses. That's what prevents that growth. So it's understanding the consequences, the possible consequences of a decision or an action, but then it's being able to own them, which is what you were talking about just before I started my ramble.
Yeah, it is really the consequences, and we said this as well. Consequences can be good or bad or indifferent, and the important thing is to own all of them, right? And but be aware. It's to me, and this is an experience thing, right? So we don't always have all of this information. But I used an example when we started before we started the podcast recording about you can spend £30 and register a limited company. And at that point, it feels good. Felt good when I registered a limited company for the first time. I thought that was amazing. And then a bunch of things. There's a consequence to transacting an order. Your first order, there's a consequence. It's a good feeling, right? Come on, let's be honest. You transact your first order, it feels great. But there's also consequences, real life, real world consequences of doing something systematic. As soon as you transact an order in a limited company, all of a sudden, that's no longer what they call a non-trading entity. If it's a non-trading entity, in other words, if it's never done a business transaction or an entry into the business bank account, at the end of a year, financial year, you can post what they call non-trading accounts. It costs £15. But if you transact one order, all of a sudden a whole bunch of things kick in. And they're very normal. They're not bad. They're very normal things. You need an accountant and you need to post correct accounts. These are no surprise. They are not things that should jump out and shock you. But my question would be, were you aware of those consequences when you opened the limited company? Nothing, nothing in that should bother anyone or should be negative or seen as being, whatever you do, don't do it type thing. It's really just the idea that when we take an action, when we take and make a decision, there's consequences. And being more aware of those. Because if someone had told me, Paul, you can open a limited company, but just be aware that the minute you transact one order, a whole bunch of things kick in. I'd have had no problem with that whatsoever at
That's what
all.
you're talking about, isn't it? The
Yeah.
front load. We all
Mm.
have the pieces at the beginning. And I was saying before, what I'm seeing is lots of businesses coming to the fore.
Mm.
Incredible people who do incredible jobs employed and have gone, I can do this. And they have the first steps. It's like they're given the first steps. Oh, it's easy. I just say, I'm a business and it'll all be easy. And not understanding what comes next. Um, I don't think you or I are saying, these things will happen and you won't know about them and it'll all be okay, and we're not saying, you can't find out about them because you can. And that, in many respects, that is part of the journey. But what I'm getting from you on this particular topic, and when we're talking about front loading, if we take the time to step back and do the due diligence, which isn't an easy word to say, it appears, then you can start to think about, okay, what comes next? Because how many times have I had people say, you haven't got a contract I could use? I haven't got a
Mm.
contract. I've got this new client and I haven't got a contract. These, or do I need to have insurance? There are things, and there are lots of websites you can go and visit that will tell you some of these things. But of course, that is just giving you a list of things to do, not really understanding why and not understanding the consequences of any of those actions that you might take.